So we're going to talk about converting between fractions, decimals, and percents. And the important thing to know about fractions, decimals, and percents is that they're all different ways of writing the same number. Okay? So you guys have seen a lot of fractions lately, right? Like 1 over 2. Pencils are better for math. So 1/2. Does anyone know what 1/2 is as a decimal? Doesn't already know that. Yeah. 0.5. Does anyone know what that would be as a percent? Just already know it.
Well, it's not that level. What's the last number?
Percents. What would it be?
50%.
50%. So how do we get from one of these to the next? This one is probably pretty familiar. You've probably seen it a lot. But what if I gave you something like 0.743 and I asked you to convert it to a percent? So this example is converting a decimal to a percent. To convert a decimal to a percent, move your decimal place two numbers to the right. I don't know how visible this marker is going to be on the video. So that says to convert a decimal to a percent, move your decimal place 2 numbers to the right. So if we have this decimal, 0.743, I'm going to take my decimal point, move it 1, 2. So this would equal 74.3, and then I can't forget percent symbol. Otherwise, all I did was change the number from 0.743 to 74.3, and that's just a totally different number. This actually equals. You need that little percent symbol. Let's do a few more examples. What if I had 0.55? 0.55. So I'm going to take my decimal place. I'm going to move it 1, 2, and I have 55%. I'm going to throw in a monkey wrench. What if we had 0.7? So now I'm going to move it. Well, I move it 1 number. There's not another number to move it over. So what do I add?
0.
What am I going to add?
0.
Yeah. I'm going to put a 0 there. Think about this. Is 0.7 any different from 0.70?
No.
In math, those numbers are exactly the same. Right? 0.7 and 0.70, same number. And so when I add a 0, I'm not changing the number. I'm just adding a placeholder. Right? So 0.7 equals 70%. How about this example? What if I had 0.0123? 0.0123. As a percent, 0.0123, I'm just going to take my decimal place, 1, 2 numbers over. So the 0 counts, right? That 0 counts as a space. And so I have 0.0123%. But that's not how you would typically write that number. Right? I don't need the 0 anymore because it's now out in front of a decimal. So I would just write this number as 1.23%. Just get rid of this leading 0. Yeah.
Euro parents.
Percents.
Percent?
That says percent.
Oh.
Okay. Any questions about converting decimals to percents? So, how do you think we go the other way? What if I have a percent and I want to convert it into a decimal? Percent to a decimal. I'm not going to write the rule up because I think you guys can figure this one out. So let's say I had 75% as a decimal. I'm just going to do the exact opposite thing. Instead of moving to the right, I move to the left. Right? So my decimal place is here because 75 is 75.0. So there's an imaginary decimal place right there. Decimal point. And so if I move it 1, 2 over to the left, 75% becomes 0.75. So 75% equals 0.7. Those two are. What if I had 100%? I want to write that as a decimal. My imaginary decimal point is right there. Right? 100 decimal. It's at the end of my number. And if I move it twice, 1, 2, I'm left with 1.00, which is just 1. So 100% is 1. So 100%. Does anyone know what percent means? Percent.
Divided by 100.
Yeah, divided by 100, out of 100. Right? So percent is out of 100. So 100 out of 100, that's 1. 75 out of 100 is 7,500. And that will help you remember which direction to move, right? Because since a percent is out of 100, it looks like a bigger number. 75%. Whereas a decimal is 0.75. That looks like a smaller number, right? 75 looks a lot bigger than 0.75. But actually they're the same number. 75% is 0.75. Just remember, percents are out of 100, and that'll help you remember they look bigger. That'll also give us a clue about converting to fractions. Right? So if I were to convert a percent to a fraction is actually very easy, usually. So 50%, we just learned that percent means divided by 100. So this would just be 50 over 100.
But what's the rule?
So I'm going to get there. 50 over 100, right? 50 divided by 100. The problem is, when you get a number like this, 75.2%, this looks really weird. 75.2 over 100? That looks really weird. You usually don't have decimals in your fractions. So this is possible. You can do it this way. I think it's just easier to convert the percent to a decimal first, and then convert the decimal to a fraction. So that's what I'm going to teach you guys to do. Okay. So if you're converting a percent to a fraction, I would say convert to a decimal first. That's how I would do it, because I think it's a little easier. Now, If you see 50% and you go 50 over 100 and you remember that, that's great. Or if you know another trick for getting that decimal place moved over, that's also great. Okay?
Well, wouldn't it?
But it turns out you're really doing the same thing that you would be doing to convert it to a decimal anyway. So you're not saving yourself much time. Okay. Yeah?
But for percent, if it's like 175.3%, what would that be in fraction?
I would just convert it to a decimal first.
But how would you convert? You would move the decimal over 2 places.
Yeah, so let's do that. I'll do your example. Okay? But let's finish our rule. So what did you say? 175.3%?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get there. Alright. So this says convert to a decimal first, and then the rules for converting decimals to fractions. Right? Here's your rule for converting a decimal to a fraction. You put the number over a factor of 10. Okay. You put the number with no decimal. This rule is going to be confusing, but once we do some examples, I think you guys will understand. So what are the factors of 10? Does anyone know? 10, what's the next one? Those are multiples of 10. So factors, yeah, 10, 100, 1,000. I don't know if I'm really saying that right. Factors of 10. Powers of 10 is what I mean. 10,000, 100,000. A 1 with a bunch of zeros after it. That's always going to be your denominator when you convert a decimal to a fraction. Your denominator will always be a 1 with a bunch of zeros. Okay. And how do you know how many zeros? The number of zeros equals the number of digits to the right of your decimal. Okay. So now let's do an example to make this a lot clearer. So percent all the way to a fraction. First, we're going to convert this to a decimal. To convert it to a decimal, I move the decimal place 2 spots to the left. So my number is now 1.753. 175.3% is 1.753. Now, I'm going to take this number, 1.753, and I'm going to write it as my numerator over one of those powers of 10. So 1, and it's going to have 1, 2, 3 zeros. 1, 2, 3 zeros. So that is my fraction version of this number. Do you have a question? Right, so I get rid of my decimal when I convert it into a fraction. 1.753 is 1,753 thousandths. Does that make sense? Let's do like a ton more examples. So I'm going to just do some that are decimals to fractions because I think that's one of the trickier ones. So let's do 0.53. Let's do 0.012. Let's do 1.01. And let's do 77.1. Okay. 0.53. As a fraction, I'm just going to write this number with no decimal place, 53, over the power of 10 with this many zeros, 1, 2, 53 hundredths. And that's how you would say that number, right? I think the rule is almost like more confusing than if you just look at these examples, right? Okay, this number, I'm just going to write it with no decimals. And I don't need to write a 0 in front of this. There's no, 12 is the same as 0, 12. Right? But when I'm figuring out what goes in the denominator, I have to count this 0. So 1, 2, 3, these are thousands. 1, 2, 3 zeros, because I had 1, 2, 3 numbers to the right of the decimal. 1.01. I'm going to write this number with no decimal places. Then I'm going to write a denominator that has as many zeros as there are numbers to the right of my decimal place. So 2. Hundredths. This is where those terms come from that you guys learned probably in 1st or 2nd grade. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths place. This is the whole origin behind that. 77.1. Number with no decimal, 771, over the number of digits to the right. So, tenths, because there's only one number that's over to the right.
So for fractions to turn to a decimal, it's exactly like that except in reverse?
No. So, and this is where it gets a little weird, right? The rule to convert to percentages, it just reversed when we were converting from percentages.
Yeah.
Now there's a totally new rule if you're converting a fraction to a decimal. Okay? Can we do fractions to decimals, or do you guys want to do a couple more examples of this? Raise your hand if you'd like to do more examples. Okay. So take responsibility, guys. If you need more examples, if you need to see this more, I would love to do a couple more.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
Decimal.
All right. So let's do one more example, and then we'll move on. What if I had 10.01 2? 10.012. As a fraction, I'm just going to write this number. So what number am I going to write?
10,012.
10,012. Put it over. How many zeros do I need? This is my tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Now there is another step to this, which is if I can reduce my fraction, I should. Right? So like in this one, for example, I could take out a 2 from both of those. So then I would have 5,006.
Well,
5,006
well, when?
over 500. Oh, and then I can take out another 2. So then I have 2,503 over 250. And then I don't know if there's anything else I could do.
You could
So-
turn it into a mixed
So this is why we're doing this now, right? Is because we've already talked about reducing fractions.
You
Don't
could-
forget about that. So everything that we've done, it's all building on itself, right? Reduce your fractions. Reduce your fractions.
Shouldn't,
Yeah. Ben.
Oh, well, shouldn't you turn to a mixed number?
Okay, so you probably have learned ways to turn these into mixed numbers. I don't like mixed numbers in algebra. I don't think they're useful at all. So I would not do that. Okay. If you wanted to turn it into a mixed number, what you do is you just take this as your like integer, and then you just turn this into a fraction. So you ignore this when you're converting to a fraction.
That would make it.
So that would make it 10, and then I take this number, so 12 over 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 10 and 12 thousandths. Then I would reduce that, 10 and 6 500ths, 10 and 3 250ths.
Is it okay if we do it like that though? Yeah.
You can do it like that. I think in algebra that improper fractions are a lot more useful. Okay. Yeah.
I'm kind of confused about how you simplified the fraction up there, and how it didn't go to 5,006 when.
Oh, so what did I divide? I divided this by 2 and this by 2. Divided both of them by 2. Okay? And then I divided both of these by 2. So I took a 2 out. Right?
Because
Divide by 2.
every even number is divisible by 2, so you can always get huge, unmanageable numbers into something easy, right? By dividing by 2.
I thought you were dividing the top and bottom, or numerator by the.
Okay. So hold on to that idea. Yeah.
You just keep reducing, in the homework, are we just supposed to keep reducing it until we get the lowest number
Yep.
possible for a fraction?
Yep. Yeah. You reduce it until there's no factors in common. Okay, fraction to decimal. This is the simplest rule, I think. Divide. Remember, every fraction is a division problem. So if I have 3/4 and I want to convert that to a decimal, all I do is 3 divided by 4. Okay? 4 doesn't go into 3, and this is what will usually happen. 4 doesn't go into 3, so I put a 0. I need to make a decimal here so that I can go on. But I'm trying to convert to a decimal, so that makes sense. 4 goes into 30 7 times. 7 times 4 is 28. 30 minus 28 is 2. 4 goes into 20 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20. So it goes in. And so 3/4 equals 0.75. So all you're doing is dividing your numerator by your denominator. Okay. That's what sometimes people get mixed up on these. You always divide this number divided by. So think of this fraction line as meaning divided by. 3 divided by 4. 3 divided by 4. The 3 goes here, the 4 goes here. Okay, really quickly, let's do, let's see, convert this number into a decimal and a fraction. So 20%. Let's convert this to a decimal and a fraction. Convert to a decimal. What are you going to do? I'm going to wait for a few more hands. What do you do to convert a percent to a decimal? What do I do? Mike. What decimal? There is no decimal in that number.
Well, yeah, because like at the end of the.
Over here? Is it over here at the end of the percent?
No, it's at the end of 0.
It's right after my number at the end of the 0.
Number, yeah.
Oh, I knew that. Okay. Move it to the left, to the left. To get a decimal. So 20% is 0.2 or 0.20. Okay, fraction. Let's make it into a fraction. How would I write this number as a fraction? Okay, so I could go back to my fraction, 20 over 100. Good. And then reduce. So 20 goes into both of these, right? Goes in once to 20, and it goes in 5 times 100, so my number is 1. You could also make this, you could use my rule and make this into a fraction as 2 over 10, 2/10, and then reduce that to 1. Either way is totally fine. And that's kind of the fun thing about these is there's a lot of ways to do them, right? And you can notice patterns and figure out what to pick out. What if I had this fraction? Let's convert that to a decimal and a percent. How do you convert a fraction to a decimal? Fraction to a decimal. Yeah. Okay. 8 divided by 1? No. 1 divided by 8. This line means divided by 1. I'm going to do this as my scratch work. Divided by 8. 8 goes into 1 0 times. Decimal. 8 goes into 10 1 time. 10 minus 8 is 2. Bring down a 0. 8 goes into 20 2 times. 2 times 8 is 16. 20 minus 16 is 4. And another 0. 8 goes into 40 and even 5 times. And so my decimal is 0.125. 1/8 is 0.125. Okay, now let's convert that to a percent. 0.125 as a percent. Move my decimal place to the right. Awesome. How many spots?
2.
1, 2. So 12.5%. Just for fun, let's convert this back into a fraction. Let's try it. Okay. So I'm going to erase all of this. 12.5%. Let's convert that to a fraction. We are getting there. You're right. I'm going to still use black. 12.5%. Convert it to a fraction. All right. First thing I would do, 12.5 converted to a decimal. Move it to the left, right?
Yeah.
So we just did this. 0.125. Okay, now convert that to a fraction. Wait a second. I thought it was going to be 1/8. But wait. 125, so I'm going to take my number, 125, and I have 3 decimal places, so that's thousandths. Wait, that's not 1/8. I can reduce it. I can reduce it. Anyone want to guess how many times 125 goes into 1,000?
8 times.
1 over 8. Okay. Thanks, guys. I'm going to give you your homework.